Good afternoon to you. I am Mark Sudduth, and this is the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. It's Friday, October 21st, 2022. Good to be back in the office here. I was up in New York City this week meeting with Fox Weather to talk about plans for next year. A lot of exciting things in the works for that young startup, part of the Fox Corp family up there. Almost a year old. They started October 25th. I learned more about that, and again, we started meeting and talking about some really interesting things as we head into 2023. But I'm back in the office now. We still have hurricane season to deal with, and our friends in Mexico are going to have to do just that with Roslyn headed their way over the next few days. And then we do need to watch the Caribbean. There's just starting to be a little bit of a signal now for something that might try to develop in the Caribbean. It's kind of hit and miss, especially in the GFS, and we know how that can be. Yeah, is it real? Is it phantom? Is it just too far out in time to, really take seriously? Well, we will look at all of those questions and other stuff today, all right? Good to have you along with me here as we move forward. All right, so in the Atlantic, the good news for this weekend and the next 5 days, nothing in the Atlantic Basin. There's the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook. It's blank. But in the East Pacific, ever since July, really, it's just been on and hadn't turned off. We're already up to the R storm. What an unusual season it has been. It was predicted to be less active in the Eastern Pacific, more active in the Atlantic, and we know how that's turned out. It didn't matter. We still had devastating Fiona and devastating Ian. They say it only takes one. Well, this year it was a pair of them, so it took two. And, that could have been the only two storms this year, and it would have been highly impactful. Nevertheless, we're focusing on Roslyn here. 65-mile-per-hour winds forecast to be a hurricane as it moves up towards this part of Mexico right over here. We'll take a look at the interactive map from our site in just a moment. First, the broader satellite perspective. There's Roslyn there trying to wind up. Good feeder band, pulling in moisture from all the way out in the deep tropical Pacific there. And this will go on to become a hurricane and maybe a major hurricane, a Category 3 or higher. It's not forecast to be that. I want to make that clear, but boy, intensity forecasting, you guys know how that can go. Look at the lower 48 just real quick. Not much in the way of any sensible weather. That means weather that you can feel. Anywhere in the lower 48 right now is generally quiet. That's pretty amazing and well-deserved overall with what happened down in Florida. We've seen the results of this. The insurance industry down there are going to be in shambles. Just a real mess. So at least weather-wise, with everything else going on in the world, the lower 48 of the United States is pretty quiet from a weather perspective. Here's a stalled front sitting down off the eastern seaboard between there and Bermuda, and then that drapes over into the western Caribbean. Sometimes these areas can fester for a while, and you get development. We don't see that showing up in any of the modeling right now, but that is something to keep an eye on. And, of course, out here in the tropical Atlantic, at least the western portions of the tropical Atlantic, nothing really going on. Strong upper-level winds right here. You can clearly see those on just this satellite animation alone. Looking at the vorticity signature, no, there's not a lot. Well, let's use a color that pops out better. No, there's not a lot down here. That little piece of energy right there straddling around 10 degrees north latitude or so. There's another piece of energy there, but these are all either non-tropical in nature, and meaning they don't have a warm core, it's more cold core, upper level systems or whatever, or the energy is stretched out over a large area. It's more linear rather than bundled. That's one way to look at it. That is bundled right there, and that, of course, is Roslyn down in the eastern Pacific. So here's what it looks like on a close-up satellite animation. This is really nice from Tropical Tidbits. And it's trying to develop some deep thunderstorms blowing up right there. You can really see that eruption of convection. That is thunderstorms rising into the atmosphere, bubbling up with that very warm water over here, fueling the heat engine. Big solid feeder band in here. Once this develops an inner core, and we saw this with Ian, we see this with all these tropical systems, they have to develop that inner core, that eye wall. Once it gets solid, then this could really ramp up quickly. And you only need 12, 18, 24 hours at most. I mean, we've seen hurricanes strengthen over 6 hours. And, of course, they can weaken very quickly as well. We've seen that before in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. But, yes, Roslyn has the potential here to have a pretty high ceiling, as we call it, for potential intensification going forward, and that's not good for our friends down here in Mexico. Now, last year, I went to Mexico for Hurricane Pamela. It turned out to be not a major impact system for the Mazatlan area. The models kind of whiffed on that pretty bad, especially the GFS. It was advertising a very strong Pamela. The Euro was not so much. The Euro turned out to be right. This, however, is likely to be stronger at landfall than Pamela was last year. It's interesting, and just from a personal perspective, I flew into Puerto Vallarta with our colleague and good friend and supporter Brent from the VI, and then he and I and a really wonderful guide, a woman by the name of Judith, helped us, kind of ferrying us along, so to speak, navigating any language barriers or whatever we needed to do to get from Puerto Vallarta up to Mazatlan. I know you're thinking, man, you should have just flown into Mazatlan. But when we booked everything, it looked like it was going to be closer to Puerto Vallarta. So that's how these things go. When Morgerman goes out for these things, he doesn't know exactly where they're going to be. James Reynolds, the same thing over in the Westpac. But that's our story from last year. What does that have to do with now? Well, I know this area a little bit, and it's beautiful. And some of these roads go right up against the coastline. They're right against the Pacific. There's these little villages along the way. I don't remember their exact names. We stopped at one of them and got some dinner that evening. And I just remember how warm the Pacific was. It was just right there. And it was just this quaint, wonderful, quiet little Mexican village down there. And these are the areas that could get severely impacted by this hurricane. So I kind of have more of like a knowledge of the local people. Like I can really feel what could happen to them in this area. And it's not just these coastal small villages where this would initially or make the final landfall or the landfall, but even the port area, Puerto Vallarta, a very populated area. And if the wave action comes into the bay there just right, you could get some serious flooding. So this is going to potentially be a pretty big deal for our friends in Mexico. There's a couple people that I've been in contact with over WhatsApp that we talked down there. Judith is one of them, and some more folks down there as well, making sure they're aware of what's happening, because this could be a pretty serious event, especially if it gets stronger than forecast. Then it has a higher surge, higher wind damage potential, and no matter what, it's going to run into the mountain range up here, the Madre Occidental as it's called. And this nice relief map here that we have as our background map shows that, and that's going to ring out a lot of rain, and we call that orographic lift. So there's going to be a big flooding concern down here. So Roslyn, it's not affecting the United States directly, but we have a lot of people that like to travel to the port area of Puerto Vallarta, and they have interest down in this region. Again, it's a beautiful part of Mexico. I've been there. I know it. And so it means a little bit more to me now because I've been there. That's part of the reason why I like to study these things. It's more than just the sensational, jaw-dropping video. There is a personal connection, the geography of the region, the people, the places, the things that can be impacted by these hurricanes. So we'll be watching this very closely. All right, so there's that. So let me move on and show you some more of what to expect. And again, I love this dashboard here from Tropical Tidbits. Very nice. And, we talked a lot about this during Ian. The models. What's the GFS say? What's the Euro show? And that whole clash of the models thing. And, I was like, I finally threw in the towel. And you remember this if you were watching during Ian. Said, look, don't worry about the individual deterministic model runs. There's a wonderful product that Tropical Tidbits and other sites put out. The Hurricane Center looks at these different products. The consensus guides, usually the TVCN or the TVCA, and there's other consensus aids, but, look at the overall trend of everything instead of one deterministic. I swear, sometimes I feel like it's rival sports teams. College football, you got Alabama and Auburn, and professional football, I don't even know, the Atlanta Falcons and the big game in the Super Bowl where they went up against the Patriots or whatever. Basketball, Carolina, Duke, whatever, right? You understand. The rivalry is like really weird on social media with these models, just like it can be with sports. The Mets, the Yankees. I mean, you get the idea. So forget all that. I mean, a little bit anyway. Come on. Let's just look at, like, what does it all boil down to? And this product is fantastic. The consensus aids and just the overall track guidance. And you get an idea. Like, it's a pretty tightly clustered envelope. That's how the cone kind of gets developed. Not exactly. But you can kind of look at this and think, okay, most of the guidance is following the same path. You don't have a lot of wild, solutions here from the various models. You don't even have to know what each of these models are. There is a key. Different sites have a key and a legend or an explainer. What do these different acronyms mean? And you can go read that. Or you can just look at it and say, yeah, that's a pretty tightly clustered envelope of model plots. And so it gives you higher confidence. When you start seeing them spread and diverge over time, then you have more problems in terms of where it might end up. And you see that when there are big disagreements amongst the overall model packages. But again, this is a very helpful product. I like it, and it generally shows us here, speaking of Roslyn specifically, that generally speaking, it's going to make landfall northwest of Puerto Vallarta and southeast of Mazatlan, right about there. And then track along pretty fast, the remnants of it, crossing the mountains of Mexico, and some of that energy and remnant moisture vorticity could make it into Texas, where you need the rain, and goodness knows we need it along the Mississippi. The Mississippi is either flooding or it's almost dried up. Like, what's up with that? That's a whole other set of problems. So some of the energy from Roslyn might make it into the lower 48 and might add some sensible weather impacts down the road. We'll pay attention to that going forward. All right, so here's Roslyn over here, over on the left of our GFS output. And we've talked enough about Roslyn, I think. We've got a good idea of what that's going to do. But what I want to focus on here is the other part of today's thumbnail / headline graphic, watching the Caribbean next. So let's do that. And the area that I'm going to be watching is generally right through here. The GFS has been doing a sort of whack-a-mole, on again, off again. Something develops way out in time, and we kind of play the game of, is it believable? And understanding the limitations of the model guidance on a deterministic model beyond 3 to 5 days. And so here we go. This is 5 days right here. By the way, look at that energy that does swing across Texas there. Some of that could be related to the leftovers of Roslyn that comes across Mexico, with some other energy that's already scooting across the lower 48. So maybe this is about 4 days out. In the early to midweek next week, we could get some rain to fall on parts of the Mississippi, watershed, as they call it. We'll see. We'll see. But that's just interesting to see that go across there. So this is 96 hours. That's going out to 120. So by day 5, the Caribbean, nice and clear. There's just a little bit of energy down here, kind of draped in there, maybe an old stalled front or just something, some of that stretched out energy, a little bit of energy over here. Nothing to be concerned with. But if we just keep going out, and this is where you got to be careful, because you don't know when the model is just feeding back on one piece of energy and then it just takes off. This is 6 days, and this is 7 days. Look what happens right through there. A little sneaky piece of energy, very similar to what we had with the origin of Ian. There's a little piece of energy in here. So there's some evidence that about a week out, there could be enough energy traversing the Eastern Caribbean that some of it takes root by almost day 10. Now, that's pretty far out. I'm going to be perfectly frank about this. This is way out, and there could be nothing there. But the GFS has shown it more times lately than not. And we have to watch what happens with this, because we are at the time of year where we have to not just look at the output of a single model, but ask the question, does the pattern fit? Climatologically speaking, is this even possible? And the answer is yes, because this part of the Caribbean, this part of the Atlantic Basin as a whole, is climatologically favored as we exit October and get into November. We think about the origins of Sandy 10 years ago. Matthew came through this area as a well-developed tropical wave to begin with. That's a little different, and that was also a lot earlier, late September into early October. But this is a breeding ground for potential development anytime. Like climatologically, this makes sense. And there are some hints that maybe there's going to be a little bit of an assist from the Madden-Julian oscillation out around this time. Not a very strong pulse, but maybe just enough to give one of these areas of energy, whether it's vorticity, that's energy that comes off of South America, coupled with a tropical wave, and it kind of all comes together. We just need to watch, because it's not over yet. And adding to it, we do have warm water temperatures down here. This is the weekly analysis from the National Hurricane Center site. There's your 28 Celsius, that's 82 Fahrenheit, and this is 29 Celsius. So absolutely, water temperatures are supportive of tropical cyclone activity in the Caribbean Sea, the Southwest Atlantic as a whole. And then in terms of anomalies, they are warmer than the long-term average down here. Not exceedingly so, but there's no blue, none of that below average stuff like we see over here with the La Nina in the Pacific. So, it's hurricane season. It just begs to say, yes, you need to just watch because it's the default area that we would be watching this time of year anyway. And with just the tiniest amount of suggestion from the GFS, some of the ensembles, and even the EPS from the Euro, the ensemble prediction system from the Euro, a couple of hints here and there. It's just starting to show up. And that's sort of the blessing and the curse of the availability of these models to us these days, is we can see out at the very beginnings, perhaps, of the genesis of these systems, way before they ever even start. But as we saw with Ian, that doesn't seem to help once they make landfall. We're still having a problem bridging the gap between, something might develop a week to 10 days out. The models are starting to show it. Everybody's watching. But when they make landfall, we're still not getting enough people out of the way. And we're still losing people, which I find unacceptable 100%. We got to get everybody out of the way. That is a problem that we need to work on and a story for another day. But I'm just saying, you see it in the models early, watch it a long time. We still have to get everything all the way through to fruition, that we pay attention all the way to when something makes landfall, wherever it is. It could be Mexico, in the case of Roslyn, and we saw this coming several days early on in the model guidance. We saw it with Ian, and even Fiona. A lot of this was seen well in advance. So we'll see what happens. The Caribbean will be the area that we watch next. Maybe something happens, maybe it doesn't. That's my job, and I'll help you stay on top of it with me. All right? All right. Well, that is it from me for today. I will be back over the weekend because I do want to stay on top of what's happening with Roslyn, and we'll take a peek and see if the Caribbean system remains far out in time. Does it move closer? You know how that works. So yes, I'll be around Saturday and Sunday with a hurricane outlook and discussion each afternoon, and we'll see what happens with these systems. All right? All right, that's it. I'll get this online for you. Have a great rest of your Friday. Thanks as always for tuning in. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack. I'll be back with you with more tomorrow.